Hello everyone, I am Bennett Kirby. Welcome to my channel, The Commander Tavern. The Commander Tavern is a channel dedicated to my favorite Magic the Gathering format. The Brewery is a series on this channel showcasing my spicy brews and other deck techs. On this episode of The Brewery, I'll be discussing my take on a commander from Unfinity, Myra the Magnificent. If you like this deck or any of the cards I'll be mentioning throughout the video, please consider using my TCG Player affiliate link when purchasing those cards. You can find that link down in the description. It'll really help out the channel. But the very best way you can help support the channel is with my Patreon. There are plenty of perks for being a patron, such as early access to certain videos, exclusive deck techs, gifts, and more. You can also support my channel for free by simply liking, subscribing, and sharing, which also helps out a lot. I put out a video every Monday, so you don't want to miss out. You can join my Discord server for free if you want to join the Commander Tavern community. All pertinent links are down in the description. Alright, let's get back to the episode. Myra is a 2/4 human performer for 2 generic, 1 blue and 1 red. She has a triggered ability that has you open an attraction whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell from your hand. This is already an awesome ability for an attractions deck since you can open a bunch of attractions from just one card. On top of that, she has an activated ability that synergizes with her first one. If you pay X and tap her, where X is the mana value of an instant or sorcery in your graveyard, you can exile that card and put a midway counter on an attraction you control without one. Then, whenever you visit that attraction, you can cast a copy of that spell for free. Suffice it to say that Myra has a magnificent amount of different ways to build around her. Naturally, you're going to want to run some instants and sorceries to say the least. Having said that, I decided to go for a route that not only cares about instances of sorceries being cast or copied, but of how many artifacts we have. This seemed to me like the most obvious thing to do since you essentially have access to a side deck of up to 22 different artifacts. More if you're also running the Acorn ones, but we're assuming that this is for an Eternal Legal Commander deck. But it's fine, 22 attractions are more than enough. However, we'll see those interactions later. For now, let's focus on the heart of the deck, which is the Spellslinging aspect. Besides Myra, Archmage Emeritus and Stormkiln Arnis are going to love it each time you cast or copy an instant or sorcery. Magecraft is no joke in this deck. Each time we visit an attraction with a midway counter on it, we'll trigger these creatures. So it's not only when we initially cast those spells. So if we visit multiple attractions in a single turn, we'll trigger these multiple times in a turn. And even then, they're amazing on their own, with the Archmage drawing us cards and the Artist creating treasure tokens. Oh, and if that weren't enough, Stormkiln Arnis gets +1/+0 for each artifact we control. Don't forget that because this thing is going to get swole. Murmuring Mystic, Talran Sky Summoner, Dawson of Perfection, and Shark Typhoon also care about us casting instants and sorceries, creating a creature token when they do. Fortunately, when we visit an attraction with a midway counter on it, they're also going to trigger, so we can very easily begin swarming the board when multiple attractions are visited at once. Dawson of Perfection is even better when it transforms because then the wizards we control get flying and +2/+1, which can add up very quickly. This is why I prioritize these token makers in particular because they create flyers which are better than, well, non-flyers. The Locust God is also included as a means to create a ton of flying tokens at once. This might seem odd since it triggers whenever we draw a card and not whenever we cast an instant or sorcery spell. However, most of the instants and sorcery spells in the deck are 1 CMC cantrips, which we'll eventually see. So this god creates a ton of flying tokens. It also has a built-in loot effect and is very difficult to get rid of. Trust me, this does some serious work here. Varen Voice of Duality is another creature with a Magecraft trigger, getting temporarily pumped in the process. However, that's not the main reason for running her. That's simply an amazing bonus to have, just like Stormkiln Arnis. She's included because of her second ability. Even with just Myra in play, we're opening 2 attractions per trigger. However, she's going to also double trigger all of our effects that trigger on instants and sorceries being cast. Just imagine the insanity this provides when we're building our board and getting there twice as fast. Speaking of doubling Myra's trigger, Sakashima of 1,000 Faces, Sakashima the Imposter, and Spark Double are also included to really open up as many attractions as possible. And not only that, but then we can activate the tap ability multiple times too, in order to exile as many instants and or sorceries as we can. And even then, while Myra is the best card to clone, we can clone anything else we want. But that's what Glasspool Mimic is for. Unfortunately, we can't clone a legendary creature unless we have the Commander Legends Sakashima in play. But that's still fine because we can copy any other epic utility creature. That being said, it doesn't take up a slot in the deck because its backside is a land that taps for blue. Sure, it enters tapped, but at least it's colored mana. Replication Technique, Saheeli's Artistry, and Stolen Identity are some more copying effects and they're absolutely amazing. Since they're sorceries, we can cast them once and then use Myra to exile them to link them to an attraction. Then each time that attraction is visited, we can get a copy of these. However, the main cards I'm copying with these are the attractions themselves. What, you didn't think this Astratorium was limited to a finite number of attractions, did you? Speaking of copying attractions, we hope to keep opening up more and more attractions as epically as possible as the game goes along. That's because this deck also cares about artifacts, and not just instants and sorceries. However, since the artifacts are being supplied by the attraction deck from those instants and sorceries, we don't have to worry too much about putting too many actual artifacts in the deck. That being said, some of that artifact synergy is with cards like Mirror Works and Replication Specialist. Whenever a non-token artifact enters the battlefield, we can pay 2 and copy it. Since most of the instants and sorceries in the deck are 1 CMC cantrips, we should feasibly have 2 mana left over in order to copy the attraction getting opened. These cards are busted here. Along with the rest of the copying abilities we saw earlier, we're going to go through our attraction deck fairly quickly, hopefully. That's because, like I mentioned earlier, we want a ton of artifacts. That's for cards like Nettlecyst. This equipment is absolutely insane here. This can very easily help one-shot an opponent when equipped to any creature that can manage to get through. The deck does have ways to help facilitate that, so this being a potential win con is no joke. Speaking of potential win cons, other cards that care about artifact quantity are Karn Living Legacy, Shimmer Dragon, Galzeth Prismari, and Inspiring Statuary. Karn can not only create more artifacts with his +1 ability, but that artifact is a mana rock, albeit restricted in what you can use the mana for. However, when we get his emblem, then our artifacts can tap to deal 1 damage to any target. This allows us to tap down our attractions to snipe creatures and ping opponents whenever we want. Shimmer Dragon helps us dig deeper through our deck with every 2 artifacts that we tap. Granted, we're already drawing a ton of cards with this deck, but it never hurts to draw even more. Gotta assert dominance on those do-all green decks after all. Galzeth Prismari helps turn our attractions and other artifacts into restricted mana rocks, but even though they can only be used to cast instants or sorceries, they can at least tap for any color, which is great. Inspiring Statuary doesn't provide mana per se, but it does something similar since it gives improvise to our non-artifact spells. So we can tap down those attractions to essentially pay for the generic costs of our non-artifact spells. This deck goes fast. Sorcerer class does something similar to Galzeth Prismari, but for creatures instead of artifacts. Since the deck is creating so many creature tokens, this class does some serious work in accelerating the mana of the deck. If that weren't enough, its 3rd level is another potential win con since it burns opponents each time we cast an instant or sorcery. If we visit a ton of attractions, each one linked to an instant or sorcery, the damage this thing can do is epic, so it serves double function between burning and mana acceleration. That being said, things like Soul Ring, Arcane Signet, Instant Signet, and Talisman of Creativity are still included for mana acceleration. Yet even though mana rocks like these are ubiquitous in non-green commander decks, they can still be used for other things like we previously saw, whether picking opponents, drawing cards, etc. This is why Seed of the Cyanid, Great Furnace, Silver Bluff Bridge, and Darksteel Citadel are also included. I know it's a bit risky to have so many artifact-based mana sources, but the deck is still going to synergize with these artifacts, so it's worth the risk. In any case, half of these artifact lands have built-in indestructibility. Speaking of, Darksteel Forge and Padim Council of Innovation help protect our artifacts, with the former granting indestructibility and the latter providing hexproof. As a bonus, Padim can also potentially draw us a card at the beginning of our upkeep, but that's more of a bonus than anything. The point is that we want to protect our attractions more so than anything because up to now, there's no way to recover attractions once they hit the junkyard, the attraction deck's version of the graveyard. Fierce Guardianship, Swan Song, An Offer You Can't Refuse, Negate, and Counterspell is a nice suite of counter magic to that end. The deck is blue after all, so hopefully you have one of these in hand when someone casts a mass artifact destruction spell. Good thing the deck is drawing cards like crazy, right? Keep in mind that we do not want to exile these with Myra because copying them when visiting attractions is moot. But at least, since they're instants, they will also open attractions. Speaking of, Will Blade of Frontiers and Barbarian class help us out when visiting attractions. I'm going to explain the attraction soon, but suffice it to say that rolling a 1 is going to be quite the feel-bad since no attraction gets visited on a 1. However, being able to roll multiple dice, ignoring the lowest roll, certainly helps with that. While these are enough, if you feel you're too unlucky even with rerolls, you might also consider Pixie Guide and Kark's Other Thumb. These do the same thing as the previous two, but I prefer the previous ones because they have more to them than just rerolling dice. And 4 cards with the same niche effect is a bit overkill. Oh wait, what am I saying? I can't even consider Kark's Other Thumb for the deck because it's silver bordered, even though all it does is have an ability that is already present on black bordered cards and has no other Acorn type ability. It is still not legal to play in Commander, solely because it's got a silver border. But I digress. Command Performance is possibly the best way to visit attractions though, since it's literally one of its modes. While there are 2 options pertaining to stickers, I never choose them because the deck doesn't make use of stickers. But most of all, the 2 modes pertaining to attractions is what we care about most anyways. This performance command does a ton of work. When we link it to an attraction afterwards, making sure to do so on an attraction with the highest likelihood of being visited, we will not only open a new attraction, but we can roll to try and visit them. This means that we could potentially visit attractions multiple times in a turn. Amazing. Steamed Floggery is another super amazing spell for the deck since it has the potential of assembling a ton of contraptions, further adding to those free artifacts. Since it's a sorcery, we can link it to an attraction afterwards with Myra, and then each time we visit that attraction, we have the potential to assemble 3 contraptions on average. Unfortunately, even though technically contraptions are eternal legal, no card that assembles them are eternal legal. However, although Steamed Floggery only assembles contraptions, no other acorn hijinks is to it, that doesn't matter. It has a silver border and is thus not legal in Commander solely because of that. Alright, as for the core of the deck, how we'll try and trigger Myra as often and efficiently as possible. While we've already seen a couple of instants and sorceries in the deck, as well as some that I wish could be in the deck, let's see those 1 CMC cantrips that I included. Brainstorm, Whispers of the Muse, Visions of Beyond, Thought Scour, Shadow Rift, Peek, Opt, Obsessive Search, and Consider are the instants in the deck. Granted, there are plenty more 1 CMC instants that draw you a card that you can put in the deck. In fact, you can swap out a lot of the sorceries for them, but I found these to be a good enough critical mass of them, while also considering what else they do besides just drawing a card. I mean, they do trigger all of the other effects in the deck besides Myra, but you know what I mean. Utility, like Brainstorm for example, things like that, especially Shadow Rift, since it could potentially make a very swole Stormkin Arnist or Veyran swing in for lethal without being blocked. Valakut Awakening is another instant speed way to potentially draw into a ton of cards, since you could just bottom deck however many cards you want in order to draw that many +1, for just 3 mana, and then we can link it to an attraction with Myra. However, since its backside is a land that can tap for colored mana, it doesn't really take up a slot in the deck. It does enter tapped, but as long as you're not greedy and play it as a land when you miss your land drop, you'll be fine. Sorcerer's Sight, Slip Through Space, Serum Visions, Preordain, Ponder, Gitaxian Probe, and Ancestral Vision are the sorcery speed 1 CMC cantrips that I mentioned earlier. If you'd rather it all be instant speed, there are plenty of them left to choose from to put in here. However, these are still good enough where I didn't mind the lack of speed. Slip Through Space is similar to Shadow Rift, making a beefy creature unblockable for that potential opponent ending smack. Gitaxian Probe, for example, is free and helps look at your opponent's hand. Same with Sorcerer's Sight. Ancestral Vision isn't technically free, but it does cost 1 blue to suspend, putting it in this group of cards. However, it has a mana value of 0, meaning that Myra can link it to an attraction by just tapping, and then you can draw 3 cards each time you visit that attraction. Thought Vessel, Decanter of Endless Water, and Reliquary Tower are included because of how many cards you're drawing here. And best of all, they're also mana rocks, which helps accelerate the deck, and count towards all the artifact synergy in the deck. Reliquary Tower not taking up a slot in the deck is also nice. Desolate Lighthouse also doesn't take up a slot in the deck, and helps out with looting. While we'd rather have instants as sorceries in hand to be able to cast them, discarding those 0 CMC suspend spells can sometimes be faster for linking them to attractions than suspending them and waiting until they're cast from exile. Other instants and sorceries in the deck are some more interaction pieces because we can't just rely on counter magic. That's for protecting our board and preventing the combo player from winning. Pongify and Rapid Hybridization to deal with any creature, while Chaos Warp and Wild Magic Surge can deal with absolutely anything. Visiting their attractions more often than not can be quite harrowing on opponents. Even if the last 2 have the potential of blowing up in our face, the randomness is still part of the fun. Overloading Cyclonic Rift will obviously get the job done, but since its CMC is actually 2, it's very easy to link to an attraction with Myra. And then each time you visit that attraction, you can bounce a non-land permanent you don't control, making this spell even better here. Inevitable Betrayal is another way to deal with creatures, but by stealing them directly out of an opponent's library. Same with Ancestral Visions, having no casting cost means linking it to an attraction for free. Getting an opponent's best creature for free and potentially multiple times in a turn is no joke. Mystic Sanctuary is included for those instants and sorceries that we don't want linked to attractions, like the previously mentioned counterspells. Since it's an island, we can fetch for it at instant speed to top deck said counterspell in response to a cantrip for that pro gamer move. Giant's Amulet, Lightning Greaves, Swiftfoot Boots, and Champion's Helm are the deck's protective effects for Myra, the only way to repeatedly open attractions. While the deck is not 100% dependent on Myra, and there are plenty of other ways of protecting our board, most of the creatures in the deck are important and worth protecting, so you can't go wrong with at least these 4. Especially since Plaza of Heroes is another way to protect one of those creatures, assuming it's legendary, but most of the creatures in the deck are. And this one also doesn't take up a slot in the deck. Fortunately, it can tap for either red or blue when casting Myra, and then once we have her, it'll always tap for red or blue. So good. However, the best land in the deck is Nesting Grounds. Keep in mind that Myra will only select an attraction without a midway counter to link an exiled instant or sorcery to it. But if we were to remove that counter with Nesting Grounds, moving it to some other permanent that is not an attraction, then we can reselect that same attraction the next time we activate Myra. So if you really want to maximize how many instants and sorceries you're free casting when visiting attractions, you can risk it by putting all of your eggs in one basket, or instants and sorceries in one attraction. Alright, now let's go over the attractions. Attractions are essentially like playing Machikoro in Magic. If you haven't played that game, I highly recommend it. It's like Monopoly, but with cards and way better. Seriously, check it out. In any case, let's see my reasoning for these 22 attractions. Since you have to pay attention to which numbers are lit up, that provides some sense of strategy when it comes time to selecting which version of which attraction you want. Since it's not possible to have each of your attractions align with a single number, if you're choosing all 22, which you definitely should, I decided to not run any attraction with a 3 lit up. The reasoning is mathematical, but I'll spare you the lengthy probabilities explanation. Suffice it to say that I will fail to visit attractions on a 1 and a 3. This might seem arbitrary, but I was able to select attractions in such a way where most of them line up except for 3. So let's start with rolling a 2. Balloon Stand, Bounce Chamber, Clown Extruder, Concession Stand, Foam Weapons Kiosk, Information Booth, Roller Coaster, Storybook Ride, Trash Bin, and Tunnel of Love all trigger when we roll a 2 when visiting attractions. While some of these might seem underwhelming at first, keep in mind that we're essentially gaining a free artifact with each instant or sorcery we cast, really making the most of both synergies in the deck, Spellslinging and artifacts. It should be noted that Storybook Ride also triggers on a 5. Hall of Mirrors, Haunted House, and Swinging Ship all trigger when rolling a 4, while Merry-Go-Round is the only one that triggers solely on a 5. This might seem weird because there is a version of Merry-Go-Round that can trigger on only a 2. However, the rest of the attractions in the deck trigger on both 4s and 5s, and don't forget Storybook Ride that also triggers on a 5. So these attractions here are sort of like a slight extension of those upcoming attractions. So I basically have 2 sets of attractions, those that trigger on 2s, and those that trigger on 4s and or 5s. In any case, these attractions are absolutely nuts, especially Hall of Mirrors. Imagine being able to turn all of our creatures into copies of Myra, even all of the tokens. Just one instant or sorcery might be enough to open all of the rest of our attractions. Merry-Go-Round is also good since almost all tokens created have a power of 2 or less, so they'll get horsemanship thanks to it, for quite the weenie alpha strike. Ferris Wheel, Costume Shop, Drop Tower, Fortune Teller, Kitty Coaster, Pick-a-Beeble, Speedy Ride, and Bumper Cars are those attractions I just mentioned that trigger on 4s and 5s. All Costume Shop does is have you put a sticker on a permanent you control, but since it doesn't give you tickets, you can't put ability stickers nor base power toughness stickers on your creatures. However, if you do want to use Command Performance to get tickets, because maybe you emptied your attractions deck, you could potentially use stickers if you wanted to. I don't have any particular set of 10 stickers to choose from the start of the game, since again, the deck doesn't really care for them, but you could just go to WotC's website specifically for unsets and choose 3 random sticker sheets from there and work with that. Put art and name stickers to your heart's delight. However, if I was so inclined to bring a set of 10 stickers to a game with this deck, I'd choose these 10. You can pause the video to calmly check out which of these and what they do, but notice that most of these sheets are chosen because they contain some protective text box or ability or something that could synergize with the deck. Interestingly, you could also use name stickers to clone Myra with Glasspool Mimic if you wanted to, since stickers are not a copyable quality. That's something interesting to keep in mind. But again, the deck doesn't concern itself with stickers. It's just a happenstance thing. Pick-a-Beeble is the only Eternal Legal attraction that can give you a prize for achieving it. All of the other acorned attractions give a prize, but they are not Eternal Legal. So if your playgroup allows it, just include all the other attractions to really fill the board with artifacts. But even if you keep it solely to the RC card pool, 22 attractions has been good enough. What I really want is to also assemble contraptions here, but I digress. The rest of the deck is just the rest of the lands. The deck's running all 7 fetch lands, Steam Vents, Molten Tributary, Volatile Fjord, Cascade Bluffs, Command Tower, and Ancient Tomb, as well as 8 islands and 2 mountains due to the deck being mostly blue. As with all of my deck techs, you can build your mana base according to your budget. Whether you include more expensive cards or even cheaper cards is up to you. You do you. This brew is just an idea of how to build around Myra the Magnificent. As I mentioned in the intro, there are so many different ways to build Myra that there really isn't any wrong way to do so, as long as you have a critical mass of instants and or sorceries in your deck. However, since I'm casting so many instants and sorceries, I wanted them to be as cheap as possible and to also create creatures as well as opening attractions. And then, since I'm getting all of those free artifacts, plenty of effects that care about artifacts. This was more a case of the deck built itself more than anything. But these are just my preferences. If you're interested in the deck list of this spicy brew of mine, you can find a link to it down in the description. I would like to thank all my patrons for supporting me, and a quick shout out to all my higher tier patrons, the brewers, for their patronage. I'd also like to thank anyone using my TCG Player affiliate link. That also helps out the channel. And to everyone, thanks for watching this episode of the Brewery on the Commander Tavern. I am the Meta Kirby, and happy brewing.